Welcome back to the Download Show. Now, today we're talking about one of the most important and controversial developments in the South Caucasus in decades. Earlier this month, Armenia and Azerbaijan initialed their intent to sign a historic peace agreement at the White House. At the heart of that deal is a Trump route for international peace and prosperity, or TRIPP, a 27-mile corridor that connects Azerbaijan with this Nakhivan exclave through Armenia's southern Sunnik region. Now, what makes this moment so different is that instead of Russia overseeing and developing as in past arrangements, the United States is now the guarantor. Now, that shift could change the balance of power in the region, and it raises huge questions for Armenia's future. To help us unpack all this, I'm joined by Raffi Kassarjian, a leader in Armenia's tech and business community with deep experience bridging Armenia and the diaspora. Raffi has been a CEO, advisor, and a thought leader on Armenia's development, and he brings a unique perspective on how this deal could shape the country's politics, economy, and society. Welcome to the show, Raffi.
Thank you, Tak. It's great to be here.
Now, first question, please give us a general kind of process and what's going on here. And it's changing. It seems like it's changing quite a lot day by day. So what is the status as it stands now? And how did the U.S. end up brokering this arrangement?
So, the conflict in the South Caucasus between Azerbaijan and Armenia is one of the, it's called one of these most protracted conflicts that has actually been flaring on and off for the last 35 years. So there've been multiple attempts to bring a peaceful and equitable resolution to this. And actually, the U.S. has been involved for some time. There was a Minsk group that was part of the OSCE that was set up right after the end of the conflict in the original sort of war between the two countries in the early 90s that composed of the United States, Russia, and France. And so the U.S. has been involved at some level for almost 3 decades in trying to resolve this conflict. Now, in 2020, Azerbaijan launched a full-scale attack against the Armenians living in an area called Nagorno-Karabakh that was formerly part of Azerbaijan, but what has been that's not quite true. It was a independent region within Azerbaijan that was populated mostly by Armenians. And in 2020, Ilham Aliyev launched a full-scale attack on that region to try to bring it back into Azerbaijan's fold. And there was after a 44-day very bloody war, several thousand people died. The Russia brokered some sort of ceasefire that brought the end of large-scale hostilities, but a very uncertain situation remained. And over the last 5 years, and then in September of 2022, Azerbaijan actually attacked Armenia proper. It still occupies 200 square kilometers of Armenia. In September of 2023, the Russian brokered ceasefire actually guaranteed the safety and livelihood of the Armenians who remained in Nagorno-Karabakh. And in 2023, the Azeris flew right past the Russian peacemakers and ended up ethnically cleansing the entire region of Armenians. So over 100,000 ethnic Armenians were forced to leave their ancestral homelands and escape to Armenia. Since then, there has been sort of a continuing bellicose position by Azerbaijan to try to expand the claims that they have, including on Armenia proper. And it was kind of a very hot peace, if you'd like, and the likelihood of aggression restarted by Azerbaijan could happen at any time. Now, the U.S. got more and more involved, starting with the Biden administration, to try to find ways to try to resolve this. The EU was very involved in trying to broker a peace agreement between the two countries. And listen, let's just kind of call it what it is. Brokering a peace agreement really means getting Azerbaijan to move back from their maximalist objectives, which were, trump any kind of international law. I mean, they were claiming rights on parts of Armenia proper, so they're clearly the aggressor in this case, and so several parties are trying to find some way to end the kind of the continuing tone of aggression that could have led to actual real aggression at the time.
Hmm. And then so the U.S. kind of, I guess, started from the Biden administration, I guess, and then Trump took it. I probably sense an opportunity to finally close the case, if you will. Now, where we stand now is this is a intention to sign a peace agreement. That is where we stand at this moment. Are there any dates, if you will, to when things will be consummated and actually what are the next steps there?
Okay, just one more piece of background I think that's relevant here. So at the very beginning of the Trump administration, so days after this administration took office, Armenia and the United States signed a strategic partnership treaty, which was a very important step to try to elevate the relationship between the two countries. And since then, the Trump administration has been very involved in trying to, develop that strategic partnership, and understood that in order for Armenia to develop as a country, the region had to be stable. And in order for the region to be stable, we had to find a resolution to this, like I said, decades-long conflict. And so the Trump administration has worked very hard, in particular over the last few months. Stephen Witkoff made a few visits to the region. There were intense negotiations going on in the background, which culminated in the summit on August 8th in the White House. Now, even though the peace agreement has not been signed, there's been a commitment by leaders of both countries to President Trump that they will do so. And in return, I think the quid pro quo here is that the United States has taken a very strong interest in this region and will treat any type of backing away or straying from this intention to sign peace as a serious issue, and will deal with it accordingly. So I think what this means, I think most people would agree that this means that at least for the remainder of the Trump administration, hopefully beyond that, that's going to create a condition of relative peace compared to what we've had over the last 35 years, or even what we've had over the last 5 years, which will allow the countries to back away, in particular Azerbaijan, from their more bellicose statements and get to a signing of the peace treaty. So I think most people here in Armenia and around the world see this as being very positive.
And then this has to go through each respective Congress or I guess the more legislative body, right, in order for it to continue.
Yes. Now, I think that, given that Azerbaijan is, and this is not, kind of a personal perspective on this, essentially authoritarian, government. They can pass through what they'd like. And then on the Armenian side, it's much more democratic, but we also have the party in power has an absolute majority in parliament. So I think those things will happen once the two leaders are ready to sign the agreement.
Now, what are some of the concerns around the neighboring countries? I mean, the fascinating thing about Armenia, the thing that keeps me going back, is the geopolitical tension in the region, right? You've got Iran, Russia, EU has its interests as well over there. How is everyone treating it, and Turkey as well? How is everybody thinking or treating it, or what are their interests and what do they think?
You're right that it's an incredibly complex region, and the thing about this region is that there are no hard sides, right? One can't say that these two countries are on one side, these three countries are on another side, because all of these countries have bilateral relations with each other that are at different levels of development or advancement, right? So the Russians obviously traditionally view the South Caucasus as part of their sphere of influence. They've been here for a long time, and until the even past the Velvet Revolution in Armenia in 2018, were acting as a security guarantor for Armenia. Had very close relationships with Armenia. Had owned many of the national the national infrastructure in Armenia, still do to some extent. And so obviously this is this change marks a marked change from what we've had over the last the 7 years during the Soviet Union, 35 years since then. So I think, they're obviously quite busy in Ukraine and what's going on that front. I think you can look at a lot of the statements that have been made by their Ministry of Foreign Affairs around, making sure that whatever resolution we reach in the region kind of addresses the interests of all the parties. Now, interestingly, Iran, being an Islamic Republic and Armenia being a Christian nation, have actually very cordial relationships. Armenia's border with Iran is one of only two of its four borders that are open. Armenia's borders with Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan's close ally Turkey have been closed since 1992. And Armenia has a kind of a very cordial relationship with Iran, while still maintaining, Armenia just signed a strategic partnership with the United States. It's on path to, it's declared its intention to join the EU. So it is kind of a complicated region. What we've seen coming out of both Moscow and Tehran is sort of cautious statements that aren't very inflammatory. I mean, they kind of see this as, for both those countries, peace in this region is important as well. And what the United States and the Trump administration have been able to do is cut through a lot of the things that were the barriers to peace. And I think it's in everyone's interest for that to happen.
Now, with the recent Alaskan summit between Putin and President Trump, Presidents Putin and Trump, I guess there's a warming of the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, and so therefore, to some degree, I guess that Russia's position around this peace agreement and the U.S. taking a more leadership role is, I guess, it's welcome to some degree. Do you know whether it was discussed?
So here's the thing on that, because we've spoken a lot about that as we've seen the ups and downs with the Ukraine war with regards to Trump's relationship with Ukraine, Trump's relationship with Putin and Russia, the Trump administrations, I should say. And I think that the United States and I think also Russia view these as separate issues, right? So there could be either advancement or regression in the U.S.-Russia relationship as it relates to Ukraine. But what's happening in the South Caucasus, at least from the Trump administration side, has been treated separately. And so even as we've seen these ups and downs over the last few months, there hasn't been any change in the Trump administration's strong commitment to achieving peace in this region. So to that extent, I think, these sort of the sine wave that we see on that part, regarding that conflict and the relationship in general, might not directly impact what's going on here. Although, these things are related to some extent.
Lastly, I want to ask about the internal kind of reception to this. So how are the Armenians living in Armenia receiving this news? Are they, taking it well, or do they think otherwise? And how does that compare with the opinions of the Armenian diaspora, which is quite significant outside of Armenia?
Look, I think if nothing else, and actually the Prime Minister Pashinyan had a major address to the nation last night where he talked about finally being able to achieve what's escaped us for 35 years, which is a period of peace, and which allows the nation to develop and prosper. And to most Armenians in Armenia, if nothing else, this means that at least for the balance of the Trump administration, the likelihood of aggression by Azerbaijan, renewed aggression by Azerbaijan on Armenia, has decreased significantly. If not to zero, it's very, very unlikely. What that means is that people can focus again on their daily lives. Companies can focus on investment, on drawing foreign direct investment. There is a lot of direct foreign investment, especially in the technology sector in Armenia, and any decrease of tensions or likelihood of continued aggression bodes very well for companies like NVIDIA and AMD and Synopsys and others who have significant development operations in Armenia. And I think that both at the societal level, I'd say at an individual level, from an economic perspective, from a societal perspective, we're seeing sort of a big breath of relief that at least for the next few years, we can sort of go on with our daily lives and focus on, and the Armenian economy has been growing significantly over the last few years. I mean, we've seen one of the highest rates of growth in the region, and that's something that has trickled down to sort of various strata of society, and I think this can only help. You asked a question about the diaspora. With the diaspora, it's much more complicated. Look, the Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh situation is a very is very near and dear to the hearts of all Armenians, in particular to the diaspora, because this was sort of the ability for Armenia to protect its population in Artsakh for 35 years was something that was very important, especially to people in Armenia. And then seeing the brutal ethnic cleansing almost overnight of 100,000 of their compatriots through this illegal action by Azerbaijan was very, very hard to swallow. And so some people in the diaspora have said that this agreement, which really doesn't address the Artsakh issue at all, is some form of capitulation by the current Armenian government. People have the right to their opinion, but at the end of the day, in order for Armenians in Armenia to be able to not just survive, but thrive and develop and move forward, we need to have peace. And this was an important step forward to be able to achieve that. And I think, I'm originally from the diaspora. I moved to Armenia in 2008. And so it's clear to sort of have both perspectives here, getting to not having to worry about a conflict starting overnight or next fall, wherever that might be, really changes how people approach everything from their personal lives to what they're ready to invest in and what they're ready to commit to.
Fantastic. Thank you for your time, Raffi.
You're welcome, Tak.